Hi, good evening. Damn, you seem to be a little bit impatient there. Welcome to everyone. So, usual thing here, we'll start on a particular topic and then, well, you guess which one it is. Then we'll open it up a little bit later. I try to start on a single topic rather than hop between lots of different ones because some poor buggers have got to try and watch this not live later on. Have you thinking that you've become the unintentional supporter? No. You were just the first one to say something. But yes, I mean, there's numerous things, quite interesting things happening here. I actually got myself in a bit of a bind in terms of exactly what themes to pursue with the videos from tomorrow for next week. Obviously, Boris Johnson, I think this photo says it all, had an incredibly bad day yesterday. Yeah, despite Nadine Dorries and others trying to go out going, oh no, it was actually lots of cheering. Yeah, there might have been the odd, lefty in the crowd who was giving it the odd boo, but actually you'll find it was mostly cheering. And it was like, are you actually kidding? But this is what they do, and they'll with politicians in the past. When we talked about honest and dishonest politicians, the honest politicians are never really honest, and the dishonest ones were never really that dishonest, because what they essentially did was to try and mislead. They'll say something which is factually correct, but it either misses out a little bit of information or it draws a false equivalence, something like that. And, so you get a misleading view. But this is just straight up lying. They just blatantly lie. They say a thing. And you think to yourself, why would they bother when we've got the proof of it? We can listen to it. And in this particular case, and the answer is because some of the people who will read their tweets or their newspaper column, article, whatever, will not have seen the live footage or the recorded footage. So, they'll... and that's what they hoped for. They know that the people who've seen the proof aren't going to be fooled by them. It's for the people who haven't. And the people who will readily believe that other people are just making it up as well. They won't bother to fact check. Most people don't have the... I'm not even going to say it's laziness. Most people don't have the time to fact check everything they hear. We're bombarded with news these days and people just haven't got the time. But anyway, hello, Sfax. The booing live on national TV, yeah, in and out. How do you mess up a Jubilee celebration? Well, if you're Boris Johnson, you just set foot out the door. I mean, and people, I've seen some people say, oh, he won't be bothered at all, he won't be bothered. He's bothered. Because I don't know him personally, right? You can infer certain things from the way he is, but I don't know him personally. But people who do know him personally, whether they're supporters of him or not, have all said the same thing. Boris Johnson is someone who likes to be liked. He wants people to like him. He wants to be popular. He is the classic class clown. He just wants people to like him. That's why, one of the reasons why he encouraged the cheese and wine do's in Downing Street. It wasn't so he could have a sneaky glass on the way past, because at the end of the day he could do that in his flat. It was because he wanted people to like him, and he thought the way to get people to like him in Downing Street, instead of being a good manager and get respect, he just thought, well, let him kick back, let him treat it like it's a bit of a social, and then they'll like me. So a man like that who wants to be liked steps out of the car to very, very loud boos. That's actually going to hurt him. But the impact I care about is not on Boris Johnson. It's the so sorry, I'm just reading this comment. Uncle Social, do you think the booing for Johnson was on par with Trump's crowd for inauguration? I mean, it was worse, because when it came to Trump's inauguration, there's like no bugger there. Trump could say, oh, you were distorting it, or there could be, he tried to say that was someone else's inauguration, something like that. It's, you could show someone that image, and if someone else said to them, no, that actually wasn't Trump's inauguration, because to see there was no one there, you had to act quite far out, and some people may be fooled by that. You could show someone this footage and there's no fooling them at all. in theory, you could do what the BBC did, and you could have the video, and you could put some booing over it, and you could basically edit it to make it sound like there was booing when there wasn't any booing, because later on the BBC edited it to remove the booing. But the commentators were there commenting on the booing as well, and these are BBC commentators, so they certainly weren't out to get Boris Johnson. But anyway, we'll I may come back to that later on, John. So yeah, I think this was much worse. This was much worse. But it's the impact on Tory MPs that will be important, because at the moment next week's going to be a very interesting week. We don't know for certain that it's going to be announced that the number of letters has been reached. We don't know that. Remember, you may or may not know, but I did do a video on it. There are Tory rebels at the moment who are trying to get those letters withdrawn. They want to now wait until after the by-elections. They think that there's a chance Boris Johnson will win the vote of no confidence. Now, from my point of view, purely politically, as a political opponent, I want there to be a vote of no confidence, and I want it quite quick, and I want Boris Johnson to win it, and I want him to win it just to shade it. In fact, I keep saying I would find it personally hilarious if he won it 52%. I'd find that amazing. In many ways, but if you were a Conservative MP, that is the worst case scenario. That's an absolute disaster. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Tory rebel or a supporter of Boris Johnson. It's a complete disaster. Because for Boris Johnson, yes, he wins the vote, but he wins it with only about half of MPs supporting him. Authority shot. If you're someone who wants him gone, yes, you've completely knackered his authority, but that's not helping you as a Conservative MP, because you're stuck with him for a while now. So it's there you go. Applying human characteristics to a Tory, feel that they are human. Some of them are, do feel things, just not towards other people. But anyway, what was that? Do I believe the likes of Darren Grimes and Maya Toosey really believe in what they say, or they're just being controversial to make money? Maya Toosey, I don't really know, in all honesty. Darren Grimes, I think there's a bit of both. I think he does believe some of his things, but there are times when I know for a fact that he because, people retweet things that Darren Grimes has said, and there are some things that I know he knows is a lie. So it is a bit of both. There is, and people, him and people like him do deliberate. They're like students of Julia Hartley-Brewer, aren't they? Who shock jocks, we would have called them in a previous life. So I think there is an element of it. I talk about this sometimes as well. It is an interesting prospect if you are a political commentator, as I suppose I am, and you view it purely as a profession. Someone like Darren Grimes, who's young, and obviously he wants to be able to grift his way through his entire career, and you have to consider the future, don't you? Like, I'm in a very weird position. So if you take me, for example, I am where I am because British politics is in massive flux and has been for several years, round about the time I started. Huge political flux. And let us imagine that a sequence of events took place whereby Boris Johnson felt he should press the nuclear button and trigger a general election this year. So let's say we have a general election this year. Now, okay, I don't think Labour are stunningly ready for it, but there is a very good chance they'd be able to form a minority government. Okay, the Tory party would be in complete tatters going into an election campaign. It would be, they'd have the most money to spend on it, but the boundary changes wouldn't even be in yet. Labour form a minority government. Now, from my point of view, if I were thinking of it purely professionally, I'd be thinking to myself, blimey, I'm going to have to start, criticising Labour now, aren't I? Whereas because the people who will make the most are anti-establishment. You set yourself out as anti-establishment. So it doesn't matter who is in power, you have to be against them. You know, so the likes of Darren Grimes will tread the path of the likes of Nigel Farage. It will make no difference to people like Nigel Farage, Darren Grimes and people like that who is in power, because they can attack them both. You know, or if they don't want to attack whoever's in power at that particular time, then, or on a particular issue, then they can attack other people. You know, it's absolutely maddening to me that some people will try and claim that the party in government, particularly a big majority government, I mean, a minority government's different because you don't really have the power. But in Boris Johnson's position, before now, obviously he's now lost his power, effectively he's lost his authority within his party. But before, you know, 6 months ago, or 8 months ago more specifically, he had a fair amount of power in his party. He was only just starting to lose it. And to claim that certain ills of society was someone else's fault. Oh, it's the fault of Labour or lefty lawyers or something like that. Absolutely ridiculous. And I can't bring myself to grift like that. It's ridiculous. But anyway. Who knows when Tories will have enough letters with Tories for 2 more years? Boris Johnson's fine. Well, maybe. I mean, we really don't know, do we? Each individual Tory MP is making their own decision, and some of them are very badly at making those decisions. Do I think Johnson will ever be knighted? That's an interesting question, because traditionally, of course, former prime ministers are knighted. Tony Blair was only just knighted. There was an awful lot of controversy with Tony Blair. And obviously we saw that because when he was knighted quite recently, massive hoo-ha on both the left and the right. So you can imagine if there's going to be a big hoo-ha over someone like Tony Blair being knighted, you can well imagine that Boris Johnson might be a very, very old man before he gets a knighthood. I mean, how long was Blair out of power? When did he... is it 2007 or 2008 he stood down? Was it 2007? I can't remember exactly. It was one of those years. So you're talking best part of 15 years after he was no longer Prime Minister that he was knighted. And so if Boris Johnson went now, if it was 15 more... Because remember, Gordon Brown still hasn't been knighted. David Cameron still hasn't. Theresa May still hasn't, right? In Theresa May's case, it would be a damehood rather than a knighthood, but you know what I mean. So, Tony Blair's a war criminal now. No, he's not. He's never been convicted. You may think that he would be convicted were there a trial. He did break the law, but that doesn't make him a war criminal. Make him a lord, then abolish the House of Lords. You can't abolish the House of Lords. We need the House of Lords. We don't need it to be unelected, but we do need the House. You can't just have no democracy in the world just has a single house in their legislature. It would be insane. That is the path to fascism, that is. If we had a general election called before the next Labour Party conference, would Labour still adopt PR? Can't do. There's no time to get into it. I mean, I don't know that they will after it. It's for me, it's a really... I keep saying I have these dual things, right? So in terms of policies that at the moment Labour are not getting behind, right? Tackling Brexit, they're not fully getting behind. They're not fully committing to what they need to do to deal with Brexit, make it work, whatever they want to call it. They're not actually doing everything that's necessary. We've even now got a Tory MP saying that we should join the single market. And although it's just one Tory MP saying that, there will be a lot of them thinking it. They may not want to say it, but there's a lot of them will be thinking it very loudly. So the Labour are still ruling that out now. And then the other thing is PR. You know, they're very coy about that. And the thing is, we know that Keir Starmer approves of both closer harmony with the EU, preferably being a member, because he fought very hard to remain in it. And bear in mind, when Starmer was fighting very hard for us to oppose Brexit, it wasn't for career progression. he was fighting his own party's leadership every step of the way. Well, more specifically, the advisors of the party leadership. And also, he's spoken favourably about proportional representation in the past. So we can sort of imagine that Starmer is in favour of both tackling Brexit properly and proportional representation. But he's not adopting them. Why not? Because he's convinced, rightly or wrongly, he's convinced that it would risk the election. And one thing I'm completely satisfied of is that Starmer, whether he's getting all the decisions right or not, he is making the decisions based on what maximises Labour's chance of winning the election, which is all I can ever ask any Labour leader to do in opposition. In government, it's a different thing. A Labour Prime Minister, I have a whole list of requirements for. But in opposition, they have one job: not be in opposition. What's this now? Oh no, I might be missing a few things now. So yeah, I can't see Labour adopting anything like quickly now. If there was like a snap general election, then Labour would just have to focus on what they've already established as their policies, and it would probably be madness to do otherwise. It'll seem chaotic. Johnson appears to be the flag carrier for Brexit. Do I think Morgan and others are fighting to defend him now because without him Brexit is dead in the water? So that's another interesting question, because that's how a lot of people see it. So Jacob Rees-Mogg has made it explicitly clear. He is saying if Boris Johnson is that it's only those against Brexit that want him to fall, right? It's the Remoners who want him to fall. And they're saying, you know, if Boris Johnson falls, Brexit will unravel. Now, why is he saying that? And people on the other side have said it, like Andrew Adonis, for example, who is, you know, one of the main cheerleaders in Parliament. He's in the House of Lords for pro-European or anti-Brexit, however you want to look at it. And he said the same thing: get rid of Boris Johnson and Brexit unravels. I don't really know what that's based on. I don't see it at all. I will accept that Boris Johnson, because of his rather unique way of looking at things, in that he adopts policies purely designed to keep him in power. Whereas if you had a Prime Minister who was more grounded in reality, no matter which side of the Brexit argument they were on, even if it was a fully committed Brexiteer, one who's grounded in reality will see that the harshness of the Brexit is not in our interest, and it won't be in their interest. So you could certainly see Brexit being softened. But when you look at someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, if you get rid of Boris Johnson, it means Brexit unravels, is it more that he's really saying, if you get rid of Boris Johnson, no one else will give me a job because I'm useless? You know, you can look at it the other way. Boris Johnson, if you look at the cabinet right now, it's not exactly the best and brightest that the Conservatives have to offer. Now, no government's cabinet is always full of just the best and brightest. It should be, but it's not, because a Prime Minister has to manage. The Prime Minister is going to have a lot of MPs in their party. That's how it works. So, because we don't have PR at the moment, it'll be different later on. So it's either Conservatives or Labour, and they're large parties, a lot of MPs, so there's different factions within them, and you've got to prevent those factions from warring amongst themselves. So you always have to have the odd cabinet position, even a senior one, for leaders of those factions, and the leaders of those factions are not always the best and brightest either. So you always get a couple of duffers in any cabinet, even a good one. But generally speaking, you're supposed to have at least sharp political minds, ideally effective administrators and managers as well, because they need to actually make policies into a reality without wasting a load of money and making sure that the public are aware of the benefits. but it's also useful if they're politically tuned in as well. What we've got at the moment is terrible. It's a cabinet chosen for being either unable or unwilling to outshine Boris Johnson. So you've got complete cretins in there, and some of them may be arrogant enough to think that they would remain in cabinet under a different leader, but some of them will know. They know that they've got no chance of a position like that with anyone else. Nadine Dorries may genuinely be besotted with Boris Johnson, but she must also know she has no chance of a cabinet position with anyone else. You know, Jacob Rees-Mogg will be very similar. Dominic Raab and Priti Patel I don't know, because they are reasonably influential within the party. You know, bear in mind Boris Johnson was all ready to sack Dominic Raab after Afghanistan, and Dominic Raab kicked up a fuss. Now, if Dominic Raab was just the idiot boy of the Tory party, Johnson would have just said, look, you're gone, get out of it, you're an idiot. But he didn't. He had to give him a bone to stop him making a fuss. And that is because Dominic Raab does represent there are MPs who support him. But anyway. How old am I out of interest? 40. Oh, I have to think about it now. 46. I only just turned 46 now. So I do have to think about it sometimes. Do you know what? When people ask me my age now, I have to actually work it out based on the year, where I am in relation to my birthday, and subtract the year of my birth these days. When you're young, you just know your age, don't you? When you get older, I don't know if it's just me. When I get older, I forget my age. I have to do a calculation to work it out, because I hardly ever have to refer to my age. But in terms of people think I am, in terms of age, as a teacher, it's always quite interesting. Do you know what? When I was a young teacher, 22 years old, my students thought I was like 50. Oh, he's about 50. In late 40s, 50. Oh, thanks very much. As I got older, I seemed to get younger. When I was in my 30s, students thought I was in my 20s. And I thought, I'm getting younger. Only ask my age to a sense of history, what he's seen, lived through, witnessed, etc. Yeah. Well, in terms of my age, you know, my big intro to politics, other than watching the likes of Yes Minister, then Yes Prime Minister, Spitting Image, which I was big fans of in the 80s. You know, I did grow up in a mining village in the 80s, so politics was very much there. But I also grew up in a conservative household, so it was all very interesting. Not that my parents discussed politics very much. So there was very little chance of me ending up with, you know, strong right-wing political mindset. What did I teach? Science and maths. Do I think Stan would try changing some of the legislation that Johnson passed? If so, which ones? Yeah, there'll be a lot to repeal. The problem is, and this is why I always say it's really important that Conservatives are beaten in every election. You could look at a lot of the legislation that the Conservatives have passed just in the last month. Okay? Some of it really, and there's some more stuff coming up that's really not very good. And you just say, well, you need to repeal it. The problem is twofold. First of all, it takes up parliamentary time. And what Starmer needs to do... So you imagine, okay, so take, for example, the law that now means protest is effectively illegal if the police find it annoying. Or if the government lean on them to say, we find that annoying, right? Will Labour rush to repeal that legislation? No, because it will take parliamentary time. They will say to themselves, well, we wouldn't abuse it, so we'll leave it there. We'll make sure we get rid of it later, right? And the worry is that it gets left there. But nonetheless, you know, everything takes up parliamentary time. And what they need to do, Labour, if they do win power, first of all, it won't be majority power. So they need to be able to work with other parties anyway to get anything done. And they really need, typically do it after 100 days. When you've come to power, 100 days later, you're supposed to say, we have done this. We said we would do this. Look at the change we've already made in 3 months. So they need to work on, first of all, what gets the biggest impact, positive impact for the public, the voting public specifically. But yeah, it is tricky. That there will, in the first Parliament, there'll be plenty of legislation. Because remember, the Tories have spent several years, well, they've now spent 12 years legislating for things. You can't get rid of all that. And the other thing is, some bills, it's not like you repeal the whole thing. Like if you just wanted to repeal an entire bill, or an act of parliament as it is now once it's passed, then that actually doesn't take as long. The problem is that some of the acts of parliament that have been passed, they've got really bad bits in it, but you don't want to get rid of the whole thing. So you're not actually talking about repealing whole acts, just bits of it. Now that takes even longer because that needs to be more surgical. So you'll need more time spent in committees to discuss the particular changes you want made. So yes, there will be a certain amount of reversing some Tory reforms, but it takes time, and you cannot just focus on it because they've got to spend the time on what they think is going to be of most notice to voters, not even the general population. But of course, if we then introduce proportional representation, then that's a different thing. We can start to target other people more as well. But anyway. Also wondering that without Johnson, who can hold both wings of the party together? This with the Conservative Party, I take it. Whoever takes the reins of power could be in danger of splitting it into various factions. Yes, there's a very big risk of that. That is another thing that is leaving Boris Johnson in place where he is now. The Tory party under Theresa May was terribly fractured, and everyone knew that Brexit was what was doing. It wasn't Theresa May doing it. Admittedly, she was too weak to... Basically, what needed to happen is one wing needed to be faced down, and Theresa May didn't do that. David Cameron needed to face them down and didn't do that. Boris Johnson was not interested. So whoever comes next, they are going to have a factional battle, and they're going to have to face down, like the ERG really is what they're going to need to do, but they won't do that either. And yeah, absolutely, if you consider any of the candidates for leader, any of them at all, even some of the outside chancellors, there's not one of them would unite. All leaders of any political party, but particularly for big political parties, when they're fighting for the leadership, the one thing they always talk about is uniting the party, because you have to, because everyone really understands deep down that a united party is a winning party. If you look like you're at war with yourself, that doesn't look good for the public. And Conservatives are particularly sensitive to that. Often in Labour, although people sort of understand it and they won't disagree with you when you say unity is important, they don't act like it, whereas in the Conservatives they do. And that is the problem. That is another thing, that if you're a Tory MP and you're looking at the mess at the moment, and you think, and you've got to think, if you're going to be responsible, you've got to think to yourself, yes, we need to get rid of Boris Johnson, but who do we replace him with? And you think to yourself, well, whoever we replace him with, there's going to be a battle in the party. It could trigger open civil war. That's what they fear. And again, that's what might allow Boris Johnson to win the vote of no confidence. There's so many reasons that aren't incredibly stupid. Like, it looks like it'd be an incredibly stupid reason to keep Boris Johnson on. If you're a Tory MP, there's a vote of no confidence, let's say. It's totally anonymous, so you can vote how you like. And you might think, well, what sort of stupid Tory MP would vote for him? Well, some of them will be thinking, they don't know whether, even if they think to themselves, we're going to lose the next election, they don't know how badly. Like, if the Tories lose the next general election really badly, that's a disaster for them. If they lose it by a little bit, it's not a disaster, because they can come back in a few years. Let Labour deal. They know the shit that's coming. This is why I say Tobias Ellwood, the Tory MP who's talking about joining the single market, there'll be lots of others thinking it. There's plenty of Tory MPs, mark my words, that understand the economic shitstorm that they have introduced to this country. And they know it's going to carry on for years. There's some Tory MPs will not mind in the slightest having a general election this year, letting Labour form a government, A minority government where their hands will be tied, and let them take all the blame for the next few years of shit, then have another general election and come back. Not only come back after Labour have started to repair some of the damage, but also to wreck it again and blame Labour for the wreckage they caused. Watching The Crown, I can see how Thatcher and Johnson compare. Right. I'm first of all not going to take a drama as historically accurate. I don't actually see any comparison between Johnson and Thatcher, in all honesty. Although I've said in the past, and I still believe this, that Boris Johnson is what you get when you let Thatcherism run rampant. Okay, Thatcher is the logical trajectory of Thatcherism. But the two are nothing alike. You know, Margaret Thatcher had things she believed in. Now, you know, for my money, what I found abhorrent about Margaret Thatcher was her complete lack of regard for people. She had the attitude that people got out of life, like a typical Tory attitude, that people got out of life what they wanted. If people weren't getting the rewards out of life, it's because they weren't applying themselves. As far as she was concerned, she worked terribly hard, and she came from modest backgrounds, and she, you know, did all these things, and that was because of her hard work, and she believed that, you know. So she believed that a safety net would just allow idleness, one of those types of Tories. But at the same time, she believed it. You know, Boris Johnson has absolutely no regard for the country, for its people, for any people other than himself. He's completely selfish, and that's why he'll U-turn so much. You know, Margaret Thatcher, you know, made the show, did she? Had that speech, "You turn if you want to, the lady's not for turning." So she had a very definite political philosophy, and she, you know, she went for it. Boris Johnson's only political philosophy is that Boris Johnson should be king. That's it. Done. Yeah, I see no similarity, even on terms of individual policies. If Margaret Thatcher came back from the dead right now, the first thing she'd do is kick Boris Johnson in the bollocks. What do you mean you've left the single market? What do you mean? You know, even some of the things he's done. What do you mean you've broken the law? What do you mean you've not even resigned for breaking the law? What do you mean you've lied in Parliament? All of these things. Same with Churchill. So Margaret Thatcher would kick him in the balls, and zombie Churchill would smash him over the head with his walking stick, as well as stub his cigar out in his eye. You know, like I say, Johnson, you know, if you follow Thatcherism, basically, Johnson is what you get if you have Thatcherism unchained. If you've got no boundaries, if you remove the moral boundaries, it's what you get. Surely Starmer needs to introduce PR if they get in power, or any changes they made will be undone. Yes, that is exactly what I believe. I think, for me, proportional representation, it's not just the top political priority for me as policies. You offer me whatever policies, and that is the one. That is the one I want. Because without it, as you say, and I've said it enough times myself, if you don't introduce proportional representation, eventually the Conservatives come back to power. It doesn't matter how long you stay in. Labour last time were in power for 13 years. That was a hell of a long time. Labour have never done anything like that before. And yet, what you look at all the things that Labour introduced, most of it's gone to ash now. It's gone. The Tories can destroy it really easily. It's really hard to build up a country, really, which is what Labour needed to do after Thatcher and Major, and it's so easy to break it back down again. And I just think about all the reforms that are needed. You just think about everything that's needed, and it's the work of a full generation to do. But you're not going to have a generation in power under first past the post. So it is, but it's the most important for Labour. I know there are people in Labour who look at it and they think to themselves, well, they would rather be secure. There's certain parts of the country where they're still secure, right? The likes of the northwest of England, parts of Wales. You know, there's still parts where Labour are strong, And people there will be going, well, I like my nice safe seat. If we had proportional representation, it wouldn't be that safe. Labour would win more regularly across the country, but they'd have to share power, and they wouldn't get as many seats in some of their strongest areas. They'd get more in their weaker areas, but it all works out nationally for the party, but it doesn't always work out for the individuals. So it's really like that. Is that Vimto a pint of red wine? It's fake Vimto, actually. It's the Tesco Physio. Thatcher believed in the power of the individual, was an admirer of, I can't remember his name. Oh, someone's actually just told you, Pinochet. Yeah. Well, again, the ideology for Thatcher, I would say, is twisted. It's not based on reality. Lots of people's political philosophy isn't based on reality. You'll get some people, it's quite common, you'll get some people, someone like Boris Johnson can't possibly understand what it's like being an ordinary person because he's lived in this cloistered, privileged existence all his life. Rishi Sunak can't possibly understand what it's like to not be able to afford the bills because he was brought up in an affluent family, and never mind his wife, he's personally worth like £250 million. So you can look at that and you go, yeah, they don't know what it's like for ordinary people. But it works both ways. You have reverse snobbery as well. Ordinary people don't know what it's like to run a country, say. So no matter how knowledgeable someone tries to make themselves, no one can have experienced everything you need to be to really understand everything, which is why what you want is a government that is diverse. You want a government that's got people from lots of different backgrounds who can bring lots and have been in lots of different professions and bring a wealth of experience to the table. What you don't want is a cabinet full of privately educated bubbleheads. Unfortunately, this is what we keep getting. I work in social welfare. I've seen the dame that Cameron and all have done to society since 2010. Not sure that's the right word. What Blair built exactly, Shore Star, they destroyed, and I've seen the after effect. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, so I was a teacher, and I was a teacher in not just schools but college. In fact, more in colleges than schools, really. I didn't get on in schools at all. And so I spent the first half of my teaching career under a Labour government. In fact, I qualified very shortly after Labour came to power. So I qualified in 1998, which is a year afterwards. So my first education secretary was David Blunkett, right? So I experienced the Labour years, and what I saw in that time was massive amounts of investment in education. Now, the thing I used to criticise at the time was that I didn't think it was all well spent. I thought that there were better ways to boost education, that there would have been better reforms. But what you could not fault was the investment, not just in money, but also other resources as well, and time. And the government did treat it very seriously. Obviously, one of Labour's 5 main pledges was education, education, education. And they did. They were serious about that. In 2010 onwards, in fact, I taught in colleges from about, was it 2010 or was it 2011? I think it might have been 2011. I can't remember. Roundabout then. So roundabout when the Tories first came to power, all the way through till about, well, technically I was still doing some part-time teaching in colleges last year. So, again, half the time, the same time as Labour were in power. And what I saw was educational programmes being cut back. I saw funding draining away. There were things that you could do. There was adult education. There's money was just leaving. There were funding to help people from disadvantaged backgrounds disappearing. The curriculum was narrowing. I just saw it. And in colleges you really see it, because in schools you will see the impact of different governments, but mostly just purely in terms of the level of funding, not what the funding's for, because schools deliver the national curriculum, right? Whereas colleges, can deliver a wider portfolio of stuff, and there's some things that colleges could deliver when Labour were in power that they cannot now. And it's like night and day, and it just gets me when people say it doesn't make any difference between the Tories and Labour, and you just think it was night and day. I had half my career under Labour and I had half of it under the Tories, and it could not have been more different. And I am absolutely certain that people who work in the healthcare sector will say the same thing, or in social care, or in the court system, and any number of others will say the same thing. Absolutely certain. But anyway, go on then, John. I made a video on the Queen as head of state the other day. The fact that she can't be unelected is an issue, but voting and laws reform more important than monarchy. Well, I made my position on that clear. It's not something I would fight tooth and nail for, but there are advantages and disadvantages. I had one person put in a comment, you can't be a socialist if you're in favour of monarchy, to which I did have to point out a couple of things. First of all, socialism has got absolutely nothing to do with systems of government. Socialism, it's not a complicated concept. You don't have to read the collected works of Karl Marx or anything like that. It's really simple. Socialism is about the idea that the state should control the means of production, and that's it. There's nothing else to socialism. There are other left-wing policies that tend to be quite popular. Socialism isn't just left-wing, it's just an aspect of left-wing politics. So, yes. Socialism is not, and I said to this person, socialism is not about systems of government, it's about what the government do. And here is the reality of the situation. If you had a government that represented a large number, a majority of MPs in the Commons, right? That party could, if it wanted to, initiate a full programme of renationalisation of all our public services, the whole caboodle: communications, rail, electricity, gas, water, you name it. They could push forward with reform for that, renationalise all essential public services, every single one, and they get their bills through Parliament, and the Queen would sign it into law, and it would be done. But if we had an elected president, that would not necessarily be the case. Now, someone did try and say, someone from Ireland was saying, well, with our president, yes, they can be a bit difficult, but they couldn't actually block all that stuff. It's like, yeah. So there are different systems of elected presidents. There are presidents who can absolutely veto bills from the legislature all day and all night. Which system do you think we would get in this country? If we were to turn into a republic, this country that is run by the Murdoch axis, which system would we get? We would get the one that favours the billionaires. And which one favours the billionaires? Having a president who can veto Parliament, because it would give them 2 bites of the cherry. In order to get through a progressive reform agenda, you would need a majority in Parliament, and you would need to have the presidency. That doesn't sound all that ideal to me. Having an elected president would be fine if your country was sort of all right. If you had a decent system, if your democracy was fairly solid, and you didn't really need to do anything other. If governments didn't need to do anything other than just tinker as and when things change to modernise, then sure. But that's not the country we've got. But anyway, it's one of those things. There are downsides, as I've said. Starr will continue to receive my criticism while he bases all his decisions on those found in Progress and Labour First. He doesn't care about any of those. He bases every single one of his decisions on what voters want. What we need to understand is that the voters are in the middle of politics. Like, I'm on the left, there's some people on the right. The reason why people on the extreme wings, on both wings of politics, always tend towards totalitarianism, both of them, is because if you want to introduce what you think are the best, like if you were to ask me if I could decide, if I could work my will, and I was like dictator for life, and I could decide what there's going to be. So I would, for example, nationalise all essential public services. And if I ever saw, there's other things I'm not, because I'm not that far on the left, like I'm fine with privately owned farms, supermarkets, that sort of thing. But if any of those started failing, I'd be quite happy to take those up. Like steel, for example, that's a classic one. I've got no ideological need for steel to be controlled by the state. But if it was failing, as it has been in recent years, not least because of Brexit, but not just that, absolutely I would take it into public hands. No question about it. Okay? That would be what I'd do if I were dictator for life. It is not what I would do as an elected prime minister, because I know that the majority of the people are not in favour of that. Now, you can argue they're not in favour of it because they're being misinformed, but it doesn't really matter. That's their perception. So the reason why people on the extreme left and the extreme right will tend always to totalitarianism is because if you want to introduce your policies, you've got to do one of two things. One, persuade the majority of people that it's in their interests. That's a lot of effort. That's actually quite difficult. And often these people, these champions of the extreme left and right, are often not all that bright either. So the second option is force it upon them. Those are your two options. You either persuade the majority of people that it's best, or you force it on them. Can't persuade the majority of people that it's best, so what do? You force it on them. So that is why I approve of Starmer's general attitude of, and it's why I'll give him a pass for now until it's shown itself to be a daft decision. I'll give him a pass on his Brexit stance and his hesitancy on proportional representation, as long as it is based, because as far as I know it is, as long as it is based on that core reasoning of this is what gets us elected. Okay, so the fact that some of his policies might find favour with centre-left groups doesn't mean he's favouring those centre-left groups. They just happen to represent the majority of people, and that's what you need to understand. Or you don't understand it and get very angry all the time, no matter who's in government, but that is the reality. Should we renationalise services that were privatised, or amend the taxes to make sure those utilities pay a fair rate of tax to pay for essential public services? It wouldn't be as simple as that. When it comes to, for example, tax relief on things just because they can class themselves to be in public service, like private schools is straight away one of them. Private schools should not be allowed to register as charities at all. It'd be better if they didn't exist at all, but they absolutely need to pay tax. So yeah, but the problem is when you deny them tax relief, what do? They just put the prices up more. Remember, the way a private company, like, consider two types of private company, right? So let's say a water company, one that's providing a public service, so water company, right? And then you've got another one that, I don't know, builds houses, say. So both important businesses, right? The water company can blatantly just say, right, we want to raise this much money for our shareholders, so this is what we will raise. And they'll, in terms of financing it, they will quite happily cut corners on maintenance and development. They will pile debt onto the company. They'll raise the prices. They'll do whatever is necessary to get the dividends that they can for their shareholders. And there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing you can do about it. If you make them pay more tax, they'll just raise their prices. If you fine them for providing a substandard service, they'll just raise their prices. They will do whatever is necessary to ensure that they get to pay those dividends. Whereas the building company has to work on a more sensible, footing, because although it's important that we can build houses, if they can't do it, they can try raising their prices. When they've built their houses, they can try selling them for as much as they like. If people won't buy them, they ain't getting the money. Whereas water, they can't just, what are they going to do? Turn the water off, then they'll be, we need water. So the government cannot allow these essential public services to fail. And that is why privatising them is just a licence to print money. but again, I also understand that it's not a straightforward, because you think to yourself, well, why don't I moan at Labour for not going back to the constitutional demand that they renationalise? Because it's not. Although nationalised services are popular with a majority of the public, they're not. The majority of voters who matter, the target voters, are not that bothered. They don't actually care too much about privatisation. They don't see it as really a problem. So it's really difficult. And the other issue is, if you nationalise, it's a long time before people will see the benefits. You can privatise something in 6 months. All you have to do is get a bill through Parliament. You can sell anything you like. The government can sell our assets easily. Easy as pie. But you cannot build them up. Like if we wanted to nationalise energy, that means we need government, we need a national grid, and we need power stations. The power stations are the tricky thing. Where are we going to get the power stations from? Oh, well, there's already power stations. Yeah, they're privately owned. You can't just seize them. That's stealing. We can try and buy them. Well, they've got their license to print money. They don't want to sell them. So they will charge a pretty penny. Or what we're going to do, have a building program? How long is that going to take? So nationalising even one thing takes a ridiculously long time. And the Tory press will tear it down at every step. And even if you achieve it and you remain in power for a full decade and you achieve it, and you can't do it for everything at once, the Tories will just sell it off when they come back in 6 months. What takes you 10 years to build up, they sell off in 6 months. So that's, again, with proportional representation, maybe you can engage on renationalisation again. It would have to be slow, because bear in mind, make no mistake, Labour would have to share power under proportional representation. The Lib Dems aren't all that sold on it. They're not as anti-nationalised public services as the Tories, but they're not all that sold on it. Green Party would be if it was for energy, definitely. So, you could slowly, renationalise and be confident that it'll stay nationalised, because you keep the bloody Tories out. But anyway, was disappointed that Blair didn't repeal more Tory laws, but he was a fantastic leader compared to the Tories that followed him. In terms of leadership, he was, it doesn't matter what you think of his policies or his behaviour, he was undoubtedly a good leader. You just have to look at what he did, what he achieved. Some of the things he did I don't agree with, some of them vehemently opposed to, but there were plenty of things I do agree with, way more that I agreed with than didn't. Way more. And it wouldn't have been possible without strong leadership. He wouldn't have won those elections, because if Labour did what they usually do, unite just enough, after letting the Tories in for God knows how long, unite to win an election, then start. Because like I've said, I have said, Labour leader in opposition, I have one job for them: win power. Well, there's a lot of people like me. There's a lot of people say the same thing. We just want to win power. But I also said, once they've got power, I expect them to do something with it. And although I'm pragmatic and I will accept anything that's better than the Tories, my partner refers to it from her point of view. She says she will accept any step to the left. I'm a little bit more demanding, but at the same time, I will still understand that even a lacklustre Labour government is still going to do more good, and I will be able to point out the good objectively than a Conservative government. But at the same time, I would still rather they brought in reforms, serious reforms, to make people's lives better, not just stop them declining. That would be better, but I want them to actually make people's lives better. And I want everyone's lives to be made better. Yes, they have to focus on the core voters. If we have proportional representation, it might be different. But at the same time, they should make everyone's lives better, and I would expect them to. This is probably a fair comment here. Blair was good in his first term. Pity he had no particular ambition in the second term, then became a war criminal. He didn't become a war criminal. He's not been convicted. No one is a criminal until they have been convicted, by definition. But it is a fair comment in terms of, yes, I would agree that he lost ambition. The first term was absolute stunner, and absolute blinder. And you can see it in the stats as well. Not just in the number of reforms that were introduced, but in the stats. You could see how people throughout the percentiles were doing better under Labour, particularly the poorest, but everyone benefited. Everyone, every percentile benefited. It was an absolute blinder. And it is also true to say that he lost. He played a defensive game, didn't he, in the second Parliament? It was then all about remaining in power, whereas he should have still kicked on. But at the end of the day, for me, the biggest failure of Blair wasn't even Iraq. That was just stupid. The biggest failure was not introducing proportional representation. Would PR end the Tory party? No. But it would force them to reform. The Tory party will never end because moneyed interest needs its political lobby group. The Tory party are the political wing of the self-interested billionaires. Simple as that. And they have been. Obviously, I was going to say they have been for centuries. Obviously, there weren't billionaires 2 centuries ago, but the very wealthy, the ultra wealthy. Like when you go around, people in Britain, and you go and visit something in the National Heritage, one of these massive houses, huge houses. The sorts of people who built and lived in those houses have been the backers of the Tory party, and the money will always be there to look after their interests. But they will be forced to reform because an extreme populist government like Boris Johnson's cannot win power because, first of all, they, under proportional representation, they wouldn't get enough seats to form a majority, so they would have to share power. But with the policies they've adopted, there aren't any other parties with enough seats to form a government that would work with them. Now, that doesn't mean to say we would never see the Tories in government again. I'm sure we would do, but it would be a much more moderate government. It would be more like the John Major government than the last few we've had. Like, even if we'd have had proportional representation in 2010, you look at the Lib Dem Conservative coalition. If we'd have had proportional representation then, it wouldn't have been a Lib Dem Conservative coalition. We wouldn't have had austerity because the Lib Dems would not have worked with the Tories for it. They'd have been much more like, even given Nick Clegg's proclivities, it would have been working with Labour. Damn, what you've just said there is actually untrue. He didn't stay silent at all. I'm not going to read it out, but he didn't stay silent. He actually attacked it quite strongly. I do remember he's a human rights lawyer. Damn, I'm just going to say this. I'm not going to read out all you say because you go on and on and on. You're getting your information from people who are lying to you. It's really that simple. If you actually followed Keir Starmer on social media, you'd have seen that he attacked that in the strongest possible terms as a human rights lawyer. So at the end of the day, you can have an opinion on something, you can have an opinion on politics, but if it's based on a lie, then your opinion's not worth anything. That's why you have to make sure that when you have an opinion, you do have to make sure that it's going to be based on something that's true. And that means you have to, it's cast your net widely. I get my information from a wide range of sources. I'm not afraid to read right-wing papers. I don't worry about someone challenging my views, because if my views are worth anything, they can be challenged by anyone. But anyway, there's some bizarre stuff in this chat. It's a live chat on politics. It's bound to be. It's pretty well behaved, I think, though. I think the way we've got it now is pretty good with member chats only. I don't think there's anyone. I've not seen anything saying anything particularly offensive. But yeah, I just think whatever government comes next, proportional representation, I will just finish on this point, for me has to be the be all end all, because anything else, it'll just be like taking the foot off the throat. I look at America at the moment and I look at the situation and I just think to myself, do you know what? There's Trump's coming back, isn't he? Trump's coming back because Biden. Bear in mind at the last presidential election, take Biden's votes out of the way, Trump won more votes than any presidential candidate in history. He only lost the election because Biden got more. Why did Biden get more? Yes, there would have been people who were actually supporting Joe Biden. Yes, there would have been people who just supported the Democrat Party. But there were a hell of a lot of people voted because they wanted Trump gone. Well, you know what? There's an economic storm coming. You know, it's not just in Britain where we're doing pretty badly. America is doing very badly economically as well at the moment. They've got very high inflation as well. It's not quite as high as ours, but it is high. And there's going to be tough times coming. I've seen a number of things. Someone linked me an interesting YouTube series of clips from an economist as well. But I've been looking at other things as well. You know, there's and when you have economic bad times, it's bad. It's a bad time for the current government. So I can, you know, and there's nothing stopping Trump coming back at all. And you just look at the same situation here. If there's a general election this year, 2025, doesn't matter. The economy is going to continue to be buggered. Labour are going to lose an election at some point. If they don't bring in proportional representation, they're going to lose power. You know, and all it's going to be is just a few years of respite, of shelter from the storm before that shelter gets blown away again. So for me, yes. Pineapple Boy, they're saying, how many more than 850,000 votes would the Green Party secure under PR if people know their vote isn't wasted? Well, this is another point as well. I will finish on this point, actually. This is, I completely understand, even as a Labour supporter, that party politics will be blown out of all proportion compared to now. Yet I'm fully well aware that there are millions of people who vote Labour every general election, not because they support Labour, because they want to stop the Conservatives, right? And I know that there are millions of people who vote for the Conservatives, not because they support the Conservatives, but because they think Labour are worse and they want to stop Labour. Yeah, I know that. And if you were to bring in proportional representation, what you'd start to see is a load of those people would actually decide, well, actually the Lib Dems, you know, align with me more closely, or the Green Party align with me more closely. You would see what you saw in Germany when they introduced proportional representation. You know, the Green Party was like ours is now. It's tiny. It grew. It's now in power. So the same thing would happen. I've zero doubts about it. Labour and the Conservatives would shrink. The Lib Dems and the Greens would grow. But what I would see is a majority of progressively minded parties is what I would see emerging. And I'm not saying you wouldn't still sometimes get your crap governments. You know, there are other countries that have got proportional representation that still ended up with dickheads in charge, and the same thing will happen, but it'll be 100 times better than now. You know, I will accept Labour shrinking, even splitting, if it means we keep the Tories out. Certainly the extreme right-wing nutters like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg. People like that could not lead the sort of Conservative party that can be successful under proportional representation. But I'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone.